Welcome to episode 77 of the Band Hive Podcast.
You're listening to the Band Hive Podcast, the #1 online resource for DIY bands to learn about the music business and touring. If you want to turn your band into a lean, mean touring machine, you're in the right place. Now, let's get this show on the road.
It is time for another episode of the Band Hive Podcast. My name is James Cross, and unfortunately, I don't have Matt Hose here with us tonight, but I do have a very special guest that I'm super excited to talk with, Brian Mazzaferri of I Fight Dragons. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Glad to hear that. And like I said, it's a pleasure to have you here. I've been following I Fight Dragons for over a decade now, since your first EP, and it's been really cool to see how I Fight Dragons has made things work, for the most part, without a record label.
Yeah, if you average it out over the decade.
Yeah, we'll get there. But for those who aren't familiar with I Fight Dragons, could you give us the 30-second pitch of who is I Fight Dragons, what's your background in music, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure. So it's funny, for people that have never heard of us, sometimes I just sort of say, we're like nerdy rock, or sometimes I'll say like, oh, do you like Weezer? Imagine if one of the guys in the band was a Nintendo. And like, I don't know, just being super reductive about it. But yeah, we've been around for over a decade now, which is crazy. Pretty much got together with the idea of a bunch of folks I knew from the Chicago music scene. A couple of us just discovered chiptune, and we're getting very into it. It was kind of a burgeoning scene at that time, and discovered a few of the things sound cards you could find to make chiptune. So for those that don't know, chiptune is new music made on old video game sound cards. So a lot of our stuff is primarily the old Nintendo Game Boy and the old Nintendo Entertainment System sound chips repurposed to make music.
Yeah, I remember back in the day when you guys were first starting out, you went all out. You had YouTube videos covering what game controllers you had converted into instruments. So before we dive too deep into the business stuff here, because that's what this podcast is all about, is business for DIY bands, how much of that stuff are you still doing? Are you set with the systems you have, or are you still innovating and figuring out new controllers that you can work into the I Fight Dragons workflow?
Yeah, so in the early days especially, there was a ton of, like you said, we were just finding all these old controllers and figuring out how to essentially hack them into MIDI controllers where we could trigger samples. To be honest with you, for our live performance, so one of the guys in the band, Bill, who was the main one that played a lot of the controllers, ended up leaving the band for a couple years. And so during that time, we kind of had to reinvent our live set without him, because he also sang a lot. And so for a couple of years there, Hari, our bass player, had to sing 3-part harmony. He didn't know how to do that. But then since Bill has come back, frankly, we haven't been as active live. So he's mostly played guitar on stage, and we've kind of rejiggered some things around. So I don't know. I wouldn't say that the controllers will never come back, but I will say that a lot of that, we hacking the power pad and the power glove into a setup that usually crashed at least once per show was largely in kind of our early days as a band.
Yep. It's interesting that you say that, because a few weeks ago we did an episode about having backups for any vital system. So it sounds like that's a lesson you've learned by now.
Yeah. Well, actually, so it's funny. In the early days, also, we used to do this cover of the Legend of Zelda theme, which was mostly a cappella, but then we would play with guitars, and it actually never had any chiptune in it. And it's because we never had it in the set. We always just played it whenever the computer crashed and we needed a cover for a minute or two until it came back alive. And if it crashed twice in the show, which sometimes it did, then we didn't have any more material. So
uncut acoustic track. Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. Just we'll figure something out.
Yeah, or if any I Fight Dragons fans are listening, Chad Solo.
Yes. He's the silentest of drum solos.
Yes. I apologize to anyone who's not familiar with I Fight Dragons. That was an awful, awful inside joke that any podcast host worth their salt would not make, because half the audience won't understand it. Anyway, moving on from there, the 1,000 True Fans model is something that people have been talking about on and off for probably the better part of 15 years or so. And through my searching of 1,000 True Fans, what should appear but Brian Mazzaferri of I Fight Dragons talking about the 1,000 True Fans model?
Yeah, in an interview, I mean, this is back in the day. This is even before I Fight Dragons. It's funny. I remember you mentioned 1,000 True Fans, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember kind of disagreeing with some of the sentiments of it. But it's funny. I don't even fully remember what I wrote because that would have been, gosh, I don't know, 12 plus years ago at this point.
Yeah, well, I dug it up again out of the memory bank somewhere, and it's with Cyber PR. And I'll put a link to that article in the show notes at bandhive.rocks/77. And if you'd like, I can email you the link after we're done recording too, so you can read it. But yeah, you did essentially disagree insofar as that your opinion was it might work for solo acts or duos, but for bands, it would probably be 5 to 10 years before it comes viable.
Hey,
here we are, 10 years later.
We made it.
Yeah. And so looking at I Fight Dragons now, everything you've done seems to be maybe not the 1,000 true fans model, but 5,000 true fans model. So to kind of adjust things there, what are your thoughts on that model now, a decade later after that article?
I feel like, yes, in that way, it was hard to scale at the time. But yeah, like it's absolutely become viable in certain respects for artists. And it's funny because even when you read like his initial thoughts on the idea, he wasn't anchored too strongly on the 1,000 number. But the idea was if you find a certain number of true fans, and he even said, I think in the original article, like if you're a band of 5 people, maybe it's 5,000 true fans or whatever it is. But I still think it's a great idea. And I'm friends with lots of artists that make it work, right? MC Lars, I think, is a great example of that model, and a guy that has done that. I mean, a lot of the nerdcore hip hop community is very much in that vein. Jonathan Colton is actually probably the truest in that vein too, especially like when you think about the things he's done with the Joko Cruise. And I think it's absolutely a viable model, and much more so than when I feel like back when I wrote that response or that sort of disagreement, even the infrastructure wasn't there, right? Because I had even tried some early experiments with like PayPal subscriptions and things like that. And it was just, you actually had to have a bigger fan base, like in order to get 1,000 people that would subscribe, because it was such a high barrier to entry. But I feel like Kickstarter is really the thing that broke a lot of those walls down. And that was, gosh, more than 5 years ago that a lot of that was really starting to blow up. And yeah, I think that it's become much more viable. And again, you've got to scale it. It's funny. I don't think of I Fight Dragons as a 1,000 True Fans band, because just to be honest with you, we don't make a living from it. Like we do it, and it's 1,000 True Fans in the sense that we have our fans instead of a record label. Right? Like when we want to do a new project, we get the funding from our fans, and like that's how it works. But at the same time, I remember reading, and this is probably old too, but I remember reading sort of a response to the early 1,000 True Fans stuff from an electronic musician who was like actually living the model and was like, it's a brutal life. And some of that stuff really still does ring true. There's an element of the 1,000 True Fans sort of like model in which you are like very much at the mercy of your fans. And that can be challenging, especially for artist types that are, think of themselves as creators. Like all of a sudden you get very anxious about the customer service in a sense, right? Because it's no longer like, oh, I need you to buy or I want you to buy a CD at my show. It's like, no, I need you to be a big enough fan that I think that in the original model, it was someone that's going to spend $100 a year on you, right? And so there's like a funny anxiety that can come with that too, because like, I think it was a mental model that's ahead of its time. And in a lot of ways, its time has absolutely arrived. And like the outlines are not exactly as he put it, but like the direction was absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing the updated views on that. Again, like a lot of what you're saying applied then as it does now. It's changed, like you mentioned, but at the same time, there's still a lot of caveats to it. It made me curious, so I pulled up the I Fight Dragons Patreon here. I'm just going to share these numbers because they're right on the Patreon page.
Sure, they're public.
Right now, you have 1,597 patrons.
True fans.
And you're raising, yes, true fans. Advanced Guardians. And $46,000, or $46,140. Can't forget the $140 per album adventure, which is what you call each album cycle, essentially. And you dabbled in Kickstarter. We'll get to that a little later. But I'm kind of going through chronological history of I Fight Dragons here. So just to throw that number out there while we're on the 1,000 True Fans topic, or in your case, 1,546. No, sorry.
But who's counting?
I can't do my numbers. 1,597. Apologies to anyone who's not on the Patreon. We're not saying that you're not a true fan. That's just where I'm basing my numbers. So with that number, it seems like the gifts that you give out for each album cycle, a lot of it is going towards that. And so I can see why you're saying, it's not making a living. But ballpark, would you say that the costs of production, both for the physical items and for the music, are covered for the albums that you put out these days?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the goal. Like, frankly, it kind of scales. When we were launching the Patreon, that was 100% the goal, is like, can we fund making an album the way we want to make it, and making something really cool, not skimping on the physical production, especially these days. It's really always just fun to make a cool vinyl as well. And yeah, it's absolutely like, it's to me, it's eerie almost how like close it is that it's been consistent for us over the years that like making an album without sort of major label budgets and stuff, like on our own with studio, like is going to cost us some low tens of thousands of dollars. And then, in recording, mixing, mastering, all that stuff. And then, we're going to press up vinyl and CDs and shipping, all of which does cost a chunk of money as well. So that is the goal. And that's pretty much where we're at.
Okay. Well, that's great. I think that's what a lot of artists strive for, is they want to create and have that creation paid for. So they're not paying out of pocket to make, their baby. They don't want to say, okay, I'm going to drop $40,000 in here and then 10 people are going to buy it. They want to know that this is going to be covered up front. We can do it. We're not going to, have to sell the farm to pay it off, that kind of stuff. So I think it's really great that you guys are hitting that and you've been able to consistently do that, which is another thing we'll circle back to in the future. Now I kind of wanted to steer this to something else that happened about 10 years ago, maybe 12 by now. You guys got signed.
True. It's true.
You were one of the bands who, I guess back then, that was still the time when getting signed meant you quote unquote made it.
Yeah, just ask us. We totally made it.
Now, I know you've put out some videos about your experience with the label and all that kind of stuff, and even wrote a song about your experience with the label, which will also be linked in the show notes. Can you go over that? Because I don't want to ask specifics. I don't know how much you can and can't talk about. Can you just give us a rundown of what happened and how that felt?
Of course. There was a lot of things that happened. The year 2009, we had a lot of the cosmic fates lined up for us. And we had, we had a great EP out that we were super proud of. And we were hustling really hard, trying new things. It was a crazy age of internet music. There was no Spotify yet. Actually, believe it or not, when the band first started, our big investment was doing a custom MySpace. We invested in a Flash game on our MySpace where you could get a high score. You had little dragons, and that was part of our marketing strategy, right? Was a custom MySpace just to really date us. It was super effective. People had really wanted to get the high score on our MySpace page, and then they listened to our songs. But I say all that because yes, to your point, it was a very different time. That year we had a lot of things, line up for us and go right. We ended up through a bunch of that hustle landing spot at on the Warped Tour, the stop in Chicago that year. There's it was a Sonic Bids thing that we submitted to, and we got to play a 7 p.m. slot on the Kevin Says stage, one of the small stages on Warped Tour. But again, we hustled, and we actually had a bunch of people. We stood around all day handing out free download cards for songs, and got a bunch of people. And it just happened that one of the people in the audience was a friend of, or referred us to, a guy named Gabe Apodaca, who was a booking agent, and he was a fan of our music. He found it, and he had one of his bands check us out and liked it. And so look, this is the longest story, but one thing led to another. He ended up introducing us to a guy named JJ Italiano, who ended up liking our music and wanted to sign us as a manager. And that was kind of our entree into the more proper music industry. We also then got the opportunity to open up for MC Chris on our first tour that fall. That was actually through a totally different kind of route of networking, and a guy who posted on his Facebook page, I think. But then as we got a manager, we got this tour, the things kind of lined up, and JJ especially had just had a big hit with the band called the Flowbots. That was where he made his name, a song called Handlebars, which was, giant on alternative radio, especially in that 2008, 2009 era. So I say all that because he was, had a ton of connections in the traditional music industry, and we got along super well. And so he shopped us around to see if there were labels that were interested. And we had a bunch come out to see us throughout that tour, which was kind of crazy. We played a showcase at the Viper Room in LA on one of the stops. And it just so happened that, yeah, by the end of the tour, Atlantic Records and the folks from Atlantic were interested. A couple of A&R guys specifically had come out to see us on a couple stops. And then even so a couple more guys up the chain came and saw us at the Knitting Factory, I think, in New York on that tour. And yeah, one thing led to another. They were interested. They obviously liked everything we were doing online and with our online marketing. They really liked JJ. Like that was the other thing. They wanted to work with him. So everything kind of lined up, and we signed a pretty small deal, for the way those things go. But yeah, then spent a couple of years. I think might even be less than 2 years. But essentially, like from there, the mission became, okay, we need you to write a hit song, like no brainer smash hit song. So I was like, all right, let's try that. And it was an amazing experience in a lot of ways, like super frustrating and stereotypical in certain ways, but in other ways, it was really fascinating. Like I got to do co-writes, which I had never done before, with a ton of different like professional songwriters. And I'd learned so much, even though ultimately I didn't like a lot of those songs. There were a ton that I liked too. I got to work with Matt Mahaffey, who produced Kaboom and co-wrote a bunch of the songs on it with me. And we got to go on our only really big like pop tour that we ever did. In 2010, we opened up for Cobra Starship 303 and Travie McCoy. We were like the fourth opener, and that was like an amazing experience. We got to do Warped Tour, actually twice, but we never would have gotten to do that if we weren't on the label and having that backing. And ultimately, they never felt like there was a hit on the album, and so they ended up. But that said, they could have hung on to us, right? We had like a multi-album deal locked in, and JJ was able to negotiate for them to let us leave, and we parted ways. I think we signed at the beginning of 2010 and parted ways before the end of 2012. It was kind of a crazy experience, had a ton of ups and downs, but I don't know. It was also fascinating, and we got a ton of opportunities that we never would have gotten otherwise. So lots of pluses, but also lots of minuses. Not the least of which is like it kind of rules out that 1,000 True Fans model for a lot of the things that you make in that period, because you just don't own them, right? We still don't own. Actually, as part of the deal, they bought our first EP, and then we put out another EP, Welcome to the Breakdown, and an album, Kaboom, and we still don't own those masters. So it's interesting. Whenever you spin that stuff on Spotify, we don't see a cent really.
Oh wow! So that must have been difficult, because I know you just re-released the first two EPs on vinyl. That must have taken quite a bit of work to get done.
Yeah, it was interesting. The part of when we got off of the label, JJ again was like able to work with them, and they were really kind about certain things. And part of that was we got physical rights, so we don't have any distribution of digital on that stuff, but we were allowed to sell and make physical copies, because they wouldn't want to have pressed more copies of our stuff anyway. Like they wouldn't want to be involved in that and stocking it. So like they essentially gave us back the right to make our own physical copies of stuff.
I got to say, that's very surprising.
Again, that's what I say. Like JJ is great, and they did not have to let us go, and to let us go in the kind of nice way they did. So like that's where I say, it didn't work out for us in the grand scheme of things. Like there were still a lot of things that did go right, and I don't feel like the music industry needs to burn or anything like that.
Yeah, it's not a record label horror story. It's just a record label breakup.
Yeah, it didn't work out exactly.
Knowing that experience that you have, would you do it again?
Oh man, like it's funny. Like I think with a lot of people's lives, like looking back on my life, like yes, that again, I had some like amazing experiences, and like it didn't turn out that led to being making a living from my music forever as a rock god or whatnot. That was probably never going to happen for me anyway. I don't know. It's everyone's kind of got their own life story, right? And I love that that's a part of mine, and I got to do a bunch of things and work with a bunch of people that would just not have happened if I hadn't taken that route. So I don't know. I'm sure there's a bunch of other paths that also could have been equally fulfilling in their own way, but it's hard to look back and say like, oh man, if only we hadn't signed, then things would have been so great.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to viewing the opportunity cost of it, and then also keeping in mind that you should ignore the sunk cost. For anybody listening, those terms, basically the opportunity cost is you can do either option A or option B. And if you choose option A, your opportunity cost is anything you would have gotten from option B. Or if you choose option B, it's anything you would have gotten from option A. Sometimes you know the opportunity cost, sometimes you don't. And then the sunk cost is basically saying like, if you made a bad decision, don't dwell on it. Just say, you know what? Okay, like, cool. We're going to let that go. And that's not to say that signing with a label was a bad decision. That's just for the explanation here.
Yeah. The other component of that is optionality, which is like the thing that you are giving up when you go down the route of a label, right? And that's why I say like the 1,000 True Fans thing couldn't be a living for us, because part of that is you have to have that ownership. In signing that away, you like close down a bunch of different potential options you could take. And it's not to say that overall like more optionality is always better. It's just to say like, in a given thing, there are more avenues you can go down with more options, and like that is a very narrow tightrope to try and walk in the label world.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we move on from the label, I think there was one city that they focused on and everything seemed to be going really well, but then they decided not to expand the campaign.
Oh.
Is that something you can talk about?
Sure. Yeah. No. It was JJ. So our manager was from Denver and knew the program director at the alternative radio station there, who had more autonomy than your average program director. He had actually given Flowbots a chance and was a big part of helping them break. And they ultimately, had a #1 alternative radio single with Handlebars. And so he took another chance on us, tested us out with our song "The Geeks Will Inherit the Earth" off of Kaboom, and it tested really well. Like I think some of the other things at the time, the Adele album was like coming out, and there was one or two things, and we tested like right up there with like the big hits at the time. So he was like, "All right, I'll give you some spins," and like we made it all the way up their charts. I think this was like holidays of 2011. I'm trying to maybe getting my timeline wrong, but we just kept climbing all the way up to #1 because people would request it, and it just like went really well. But like that was kind of the make or break moment for the label, where it was like, JJ had gotten that and we were testing well and the data was good. But like at that point, in order to go from like one station to national play, somebody has to put some radio promotion dollars behind that. Essentially, like if you're the label, you have to say like, all right, this is going to be one of the things we're going to push at alternative radio. And it was kind of a, not to be vulgar, but a shit or get off the pot moment. And the call was, we're going to get off the pot.
Man, that sounds like one of those opportunity cost moments where they said, well, we're not going to spend, $100,000 on this. And they're like, oh, we could have had $1 million.
Who knows? Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that like, and there's a billion factors that go into that. Like if you're the person making the call in the A&R department about what you're going to go, there's a finite number of slots, right, that you're going to be able to take and push in this time, and you're placing a bet. And like while we had one station where we did well, a bunch of the response was like, yeah, it's a little quirky of a song. I could see how it'd do well in Denver, but like I don't know, we don't think it'll do well other places, and who knows? Let me put it this way. It would have been a big bet for them to try and take it wide. And actually, the other weird element is, so with Flowbots, they weren't signed at the time. So JJ had been able to kind of do more of a guerrilla tactic. But ironically, because we were signed, it kind of stopped it. Like we had to ride with the label or not at all. Like you couldn't get other stations interested because it was kind of like, wait a minute, like, but these guys are on Atlantic, or actually technically. So it's funny, our contract was with Atlantic, but they released us through an imprint called Photo Finish, just because that was where 303 was, and we were working with the same booking agent, and it seemed like ultimately they thought that it would be a place that would know how to market us a little bit better than like big Atlantic, which is not as much into the niche artists. But anyway, so I say that because ultimately like the call from a lot of these folks was like, look, I have a weekly meeting with the radio promotion guys from Atlantic. How come they're not bringing you up?
Oof.
We couldn't really take it by ourselves because, it was like something doesn't square here.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a really rough break.
Yeah. It was a funny high because when the test stuff came back in on Geeks and it was like off the charts, it was like, oh, this is it. It's like vindication. All this time spent making the album, it's going to be a hit. And then like, within a couple months to see it like peak and then have its time and the label not want to do anything with it was just like a little bit heartbreaking for sure.
Yeah, that sounds brutal. Well, I will not make you dwell on that.
It's all good.
I won't pour salt in your wounds. Moving on to happier notes, you've always had a history of being very innovative, as we mentioned earlier with Patreon, and we'll get there. I keep saying that, but we'll get there. And, with Kickstarter, but going back even before that, you guys came up with something really, really creative, which was the USB card lifetime membership. And I believe you sold out of all of them in like a week, right?
Yeah. So this was before there was any Kickstarter or anything like that. We were trying to find ways to do essentially, direct to fan funding. And the idea was we sold it for $100. You could buy a USB drive. It wasn't really so much about the USB drive, but you're buying a lifetime membership where you get any music we've ever released and a digital copy of any music we ever will release, and you can get into any IFD show for the rest of your life. Like we'll just put you on the guest list and you can come in. And yeah, we sold 100 of them. It actually was really what funded our first tour with MC Chris, because we were, getting paid $100 a night. It's just kind of standard as the opener. You're basically having to pay your own way on the tour and sell merch and stuff like that. But for most bands of any size, it's one thing if you're like one person, you could tag along. But if say we were 6 people at the time and you've got a bunch of gear and merch and stuff like that, it's going to cost you money. So yeah, we sold 100 of those. They sold out within a week, and that $10,000 helped us to fund that tour. Yeah, like I say, the infrastructure just wasn't there. So because again, we sold those all on PayPal, and there was no really e-commerce infrastructure for do it yourself. We just found a way to do it, and yeah, we've always been just trying different things like that. And that stuff is actually still lasts. I'd say every show we've played, even to the last show we played before pandemic lockdown, a couple months before the lockdown, there were plenty of lifetime members in the audience.
That's amazing. And I think that shows a couple things. To me, the first important thing that anybody who's listening should take away from this is don't do what everyone else is doing. Figure out what you can do, what unique selling proposition you can give. Say hey, we're going to do this super cool thing that no one else is doing, and people are going to want it. In a way, that's what you've been doing even with the Kickstarter and Patreon campaigns you've done. So going a little bit further down the path of unique merchandise, for every tour, at least the last 8 years or so, I think, of tours, you've done dog tags. Can you talk about that a little bit? What inspired that idea? What sparked it? And is that kind of an extension of the lifetime memberships without it being a lifetime membership? It does seem like it's a way to fund the tours.
It's related. Yeah. So it's funny. It used to be about the tours when we would do full national tours. We haven't done a national tour in a long time. So now we've kind of switched it to be one per album, or at least one per crowdfunding campaign. But yeah, at the time there was an element of funding the tours, but just an element also of, I don't know, it's really cool. I like to make collectible and limited edition things whenever we can, because not only do I think that's cool when you're oh, well, however many people buy these, there's only 100 odd of this tour, and there's only, 75 of this tour. But yeah, they've all pretty much been titanium laser inscribed dog tags. So they're super durable, and we inscribe people's names on the back too. So they're personalized at the same time. But yeah, and then the idea is if you have a bunch, because at this point, I think we've released 5 or 6 of them over the years. There are people that will come to shows with multiple on their dog tag chain, and it's I don't know, it's cool. I've been looking into challenge coins too. Those are a little bit more intense to make because they have 3D surfacing to them. But I don't know, I love artifacts that you can have with you and show to other people and collect, and I feel that's not only is it a cool way to obviously raise money, but I like that as a consumer too, that you can have almost this exclusive club type of feel to it.
Yeah, it's gives people the opportunity to buy a leveled up VIP access laminate that costs $1 to print, and then you don't look like an idiot wearing it, because the laminates, who wears a laminate around town? But you can wear a dog tag. It's cool,
Yeah.
So yeah, I dig that. And again, I think that goes back to showing you thought of something unique that no one else is doing, but you knew your audience would eat up, and that kind of innovation is something that I think a lot of artists kind of miss, because they are looking at what everyone else is doing, or they're looking at what the superstars are doing. It's the superstars aren't trying to grow an audience. They have an audience. They're going to sell you the $200 merch package that comes with a quarter of the stuff that an iFight Dragon's $50 merch package would have in it,
Yeah, it's fun. That was, I always struggled with that, especially when other people would talk or ask advice about being a guerrilla band or indie band, how to do it yourself, how to market, how to kind of try and grow. so many people fixate on what the superstars are doing, or even like when they're trying to tell other people what their music sounds like. So many people will be like, oh, it's John Mayer crossed with U2. And you're like, that doesn't actually tell people anything, right? Like, you're not going to be building your fan base with people who like John Mayer and U2. If there's people who would like your music, ideally you want to find somebody else who's a small band that those people like, right? Maybe bigger than you, but like if you know where your music fits into this larger ecosystem, that's where you can find the people that would actually like your music and might actually be your fans. Not by like saying, if you like John Mayer, or I mean, John Mayer's even a dated reference. I'm an old man at this point. If you like Justin Bieber or like world famous star XYZ, then you'll love our music.
Yeah, it seems like people fixate on the pop stars because they think everyone knows that name.
And everyone does.
But the music fans don't listen to that person. The true fans that you want, they're not going to listen to BTS or whatever.
Right. It's funny. I used to be especially in the early days, I was very into Seth Godin specifically, as kind of a guerrilla marketing or viral marketing guru. And his comment about that is that like fans of mass media always want the regular kind. Like they want that, like, is his phrase for all that stuff. Like, I just want the regular kind. Like there isn't even an awareness often that like there is a different kind to like. They like music and, the music they hear on the radio or TV or, wherever these days, but YouTube, I guess. But point being, like, yeah, there's different bands are different points in their life cycle too. It wasn't until I was in the music industry that I discovered the term heritage, which is like sort of derogatory, but it's like a term for bands that have like found their fan base and that is their fan base. And now they have lots of them make just boatloads of money, but they're considered like heritage acts. And one of the things I learned was like, you actually really don't want to open for a heritage act on a tour because like their fans really don't care about you. Like these are not folks that are like looking for new music. These are folks whose music tastes are well established and they are there to see, like, I don't know, I knew folks that were opening up for The Offspring. Right. And you feel like on one hand, you're like, oh man, that's an amazing tour. Like it's going to be huge. There's going to be lots of people there. But on the other hand, like the people going to see The Offspring have been going to see The Offspring for 20 years and are not that interested in finding out about you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough line to toe because sometimes there's bands like, I'm going to use Linkin Park as an example, where they have the older dedicated fans, but then they also have the new fans because their sound has been evolving. Or maybe, Bring Me the Horizon is an even better example because they're still active and their sound has changed so much. So they still have the old school fans who've been with them for, I think they've been around 15 years or so, but they also have all the new fans who like the normal stuff, which is what, Bring Me is now.
The regular kind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's not, obviously these are we're talking reductive categories, right? It's not like there's nobody at an Offspring concert that would want to hear new music. It's being reductive, but like at the same time, it's funny because it's a useful mental model when you think about like trying to be like, if you're targeting fans of some like giant act or some like very well established act, it's just not going to be as useful as if you're finding fans of a new band that's come out in the past few years that has like, a couple 100,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, but is like touring and doing great stuff. And like, actually their fans would really like your music. And so I don't know, that's a lot more useful in my opinion than thinking about some giant established act.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like, to put it into perspective is, in my mind, what you're saying is, who would you rather open for, musical differences aside, Kiss or Bring Me the Horizon? Imagine they sounded absolutely the same. The genre did not matter. Kiss or Bring Me, which is going to be more advantageous for you? Kiss is probably going to sell more tickets.
Yeah, you'll be in an arena.
But Bring Me is going to have a much more appropriate audience.
Yes, and a larger percentage of people that are actually going to be interested in finding new music and listening to the opener. And yeah, to your point, like actually I think there are bands that have a reputation for that, right? And their fan base has a reputation for that. And so it's like, but even understanding that already kind of gives you a leg up, right? You're not just thinking about, man, if only we could get an opening slot for Kiss.
Oh, Metallica. We'll get so many Spotify streams. Oh, yeah. Well, so I've been saying we'll get to this throughout the whole interview, so I think it's time we should pivot over to Kickstarter and Project Atma. You guys set a really small goal, 20 grand.
That's been the goal, man. So it's funny. That's why I say like it's been the same thing for a long time, because that was in 2013 and now we're in 2021. So it's like 8 years later. But yeah, I figured at the time, like, look, bare bones, if we go like minimum, at least with 20 grand, we could record the album, make it high quality, and then we would still have to like pay to manufacture it and release it and all that stuff. But like with 20 grand, you can make a decent album, maybe cut some corners in terms of like how we do the production, but like the end product would still be the same. And yeah, it definitely blew the lid off expectations there. And it's funny because it's always a mix, to your point, of like do what other people aren't doing. I like to be on the leading edge, but not the like bleeding edge sometimes. I mean, it depends, right? Because if you've got an idea and nobody's done it, like try it out. Awesome. See what happens. But like a lot of times when things are like waves that are cresting, there's a good reason. And so I was watching like many people, like I was keeping an eye on Kickstarter, seeing what was happening. Amanda Palmer did her gigantic one that I think was a lot of people's first exposure. But yeah, I mean, and I've kept an eye on Amanda Palmer, what she was doing a lot of that really innovative stuff. That was like a lot of my inspiration in the early days too. She did this thing like where she sold like the Friday night t-shirt club was a very famous thing amongst those like indie music promotion circles at the time. This was even before Twitter, I think, or maybe like the early days of Twitter. And she tweeted out like, who else is home on a Friday night? And like got a bunch of responses. And then so she had a bunch of t-shirts pressed up for like people that were like the Friday night social club or something like that, and sold $10,000 for the t-shirts. And everyone was like, "Wah!" But yeah, so I saw that and thought about how we could do that and put our own twist on it. And the biggest twist was like, we're going to make a basic album. And then if our funding goes past these stretch goals, the album itself that everybody gets is going to get crazier and crazier and crazier to the point that the end product we made was this like crazy triple gatefold with a graphic novel inside and a fold out poster on like fluorescent blue-green vinyl. Yeah, we just went nuts.
And you hit almost 6 times the goal. You came out to about 115,000 in a month. That must have been like insane to just see the numbers going up and up and up.
It was mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think you hit the main goal in the first 24 hours, or maybe even the first 12 hours.
Let me put it that way. It was significantly more than our record advance from the major label. And we still got to own the record and all that stuff.
Take that, Atlantic. That makes me think, how much of a boost in fans did you see while you were signed to the label? Because I think it might be a little difficult to track how many came from being signed to the label, but you can probably kind of estimate how many came during that period.
It's really hard to say, just to be real with you. Like the metrics themselves even changed so drastically. Like when we were first getting started, I used to keep an eye on a site called Last FM, which was like certain people could hook up their iTunes to Last FM and it would track what they played. It was called a Scrabble. And like that was one of the only sources to like get a bead on how many people were actually listening to your music. And then like over time we would measure our email list subscribers, but like that fell off, especially in the air once Facebook really took off. Like email list subscribers kind of wasn't as big a thing. Facebook fans was a big thing. But then like that really has fallen off in the last few years as Facebook is like an old people platform. And I just to be real with you, I haven't even kept track of it as much lately, right? I think these days I mostly tend to look at Spotify monthly listeners as like a good gauge. And by those metrics, like we've been still steadily climbing, like slowly and with spurts, but over time. I don't know. It's hard to say the impact of the label because those years were like so much of our really active time, right? It's hard to say. We kind of made a living. We definitely did it full time. I don't know if you could say we made a living, but like all of us were doing it full time, right? We did tours that lasted months at a time, and we were, dedicating so much of our time to recording, and that like just honestly in the time since about like 2013 has not been the case, right? Like most of us have had to work straight jobs too, and we still make music with IFD and tour on occasion, but it's hard to like compare apples to apples, if that makes sense. MySpace listeners. I forgot. MySpace listeners was actually the real metric, the currency of the realm when we started back in 2008, 2009.
Yeah, and I'm sure you had some kind of counter on the game that you coded or had coded. That's great. But yeah, I think also that happens to so many artists. Like all the big established acts, they'll do a tour every 2 or 3 years, and they'll do a big, world tour that's like, 180 days long, and they go everywhere. And then they're like, okay, we're going to see you in 2.5 years. And so comparing that to any DIY band who's doing 200 shows a year for 3 years, it's only natural. You can't keep that up. You grow up and you get a family.
Exactly. That's a big piece of it. I mean, like, just to be real with you, when I thought about, like, family was always something I wanted to do. And that's like, yeah, spending months and months out of the year in a van is really hard to do when you start to have kids. Like, not seeing them for lengths of time. Those are sacrifices you can make, but they're definitely, you've got to want to make them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, continuing down the path of creative fundraising, I think that's probably the best way to sum up all the different sources you've figured out over the years. What was the moment like when you said, you know what, we're not going to use Kickstarter anymore. We're going to switch to Patreon. Was that like a conscious thing, like, hey, light bulb, or how was that?
Light bulb, yeah, light bulb is strong. I'll say this: Kickstarter was amazing. It blew my mind with sort of what we were able to raise, but at the same time, it was very bad for my mental health and for the making of an album, because, like, so you have a 30-day funding period, right? And then you go do your thing. And, like, it was well documented for a few years there, especially I feel like when Kickstarter was first blowing up, about the number of creators that just cracked under the pressure and either never delivered their projects or, like, ran out of budget. Like, so many things can go wrong. We were classic there. Like, we basically had to record the album twice because I picked a producer that ultimately, like, we didn't get along with, and he was a super talented producer, but ultimately, like, didn't gel with the band. And so I ended up, like, pulling the plug and basically starting over again, but we didn't get any of that money back. So, like, there were twists and turns. It took us way longer than we thought. Like, people were generally patient with us, but there's still just, like, so much, I don't know, anxiety that comes with, like, people gave you their money 2 years ago and they're still waiting to get their stuff. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is Kickstarter, and we very much embrace the medium, is all about these sort of, especially at the time, was very much about these, like, outlandish special rewards. So, like, what crazy reward tiers can you get for 250 or 500 or 700, whatever. Like, that's part, and honestly, that's, like, part of the 1,000 True Fans model. Going back to that, is, like, you have some people who are willing to pay $500 instead of 15, and, like, that's part of how you make it work. Is you don't have to find 100,000 people to give you $10 each. You can find, whatever. I'm butchering the numbers, but you get the idea, right? Like, there's some people that have more disposable income and that want to support you to that level. But the flip side of that is actually fulfilling that. And we went nuts, man. Like, there were all kinds of, like, framed lyric sheets and custom requests, and, like, I still remember the very last reward that I fulfilled on the Kickstarter wasn't until September after the album was released. So, like, a full 9 months later. And it was because one of the rewards was writing people's custom theme songs. So I had to write 7 different custom theme songs, and then, like, we recorded them in the recording studio, like, did it up fully, and they came out great. But, like, man, I tell you, it was like a 3-year journey to fulfill all that stuff. And, like, the two things that I didn't love about it were, one, that anxiety up front, and two, like, the amount of focus that went onto these rewards that really had nothing to do with making music, or with, like, making music for people. Like, right, there are, like, a lot of one-off things which were cool, but I just didn't want, I had, at that time, again, I wasn't doing it full time, and I, like, didn't want to spend the limited time I had to work on music in my life working on, like, some random tchotchke that was a reward that I thought up that was actually kind of a weird idea. So all of that to say, like, when we thought about making another album, like, honestly, after the Kickstarter was finally all done, we kind of, like, were burned out for a little bit. And I don't think for a lot of, like, 20, I'm going to get my years wrong, but, like, there was probably a solid, like, 6 months to a year where it's just like we weren't actively working on anything. And then when we came back around to it and everyone was, like, kind of getting their mojo back, it was like, do we want to start all that over again? Like, do we want to kind of start from ground zero and think about a Kickstarter and hope that people will, like, sign up again and all this stuff? And because that's the other thing, like, you're just starting from zero with every Kickstarter. And obviously you still have some of the same fans, so, like, you're going to tell them about it, all that fun stuff. Like, a lot of the same people will come back, but, like, I had been keeping an eye on Patreon as a platform, and it was one of those things where it's like, it's not really designed to do like what we did with the Kickstarter, but I don't know, I kind of love it. Like, there was, I had the idea that if we mangled Patreon, because Patreon is really designed for, like, people that make either webcomics or videos, right? Something where you get, like, a monthly subscription and you're supporting some volume of work they do. And it was like, well, I kind of want to do something that's a little bit like this Kickstarter, but a couple key differences. Like, first of all, people don't have to give you money up front, so you don't have anxiety about that. You haven't paid anything. If you don't want to be here, peace out. And like, ultimately, when we're done with the album, then you get to like lock in your tier and choose what you want. So I liked that. I also really liked the idea that there wasn't a set like timeline. Again, that kind of goes along with that. Like we were like, look, we think it's going to take about this long, but if it doesn't, it doesn't. And like, you haven't paid anything, so who cares? Like, we're just going to keep like working on it. And then the other piece was it like very naturally led itself to weekly content, because it's like, well, we're going to be making an album, or that's the idea, an album adventure. And like, we're going to let you into the process and you'll see behind the scenes. And it's like, honestly, it's a pretty small fraction of people that care that much, that want to like be following along weekly. But those people really care. And for everybody else, you can always go back, and kind of just like take a afternoon or whatever and kind of dive into all those other posts and get into it too. So I don't know. I liked a lot of the different ways of that. And the other thing is I wanted to refine the rewards so they were all super focused on the album itself. So again, taking away this idea of like, we're going to write you a custom theme song, which was like the ultimate of like tons of work, totally unrelated, for one person, a fun thing to try. But like, I found that was, given the limited time we had, I wanted all the rewards to be about the album. So like, we kept the things like singing on the album, right? So for our last albums for the near future and Canonized, people could have their voices on the album, like on a track. Literally, we have like a gang vocal or a choir section and things like that, where it's still like, you can have your name in the credits for a certain level, right? Those are like the types of rewards that I felt still lined up with this idea of like, we're going on this adventure with people. And then I suppose the last and most important thing is, because it's Patreon, it's not a one and done. Like, the idea is you are a patron, right? You're there and you're signed up and you can come and go at any time. But like, we will continue having adventures and making, we're just about to finish our second one now, which is kind of crazy that like we didn't have to start from scratch. We just kind of picked up where we left off, and it's been amazing.
Yeah. I think, like I said before the interview, I like to describe it as an evergreen Kickstarter. That's essentially what you're doing.
Yeah, that's kind of how we're using it, with some twists, right? Like I think it's important that the funding period is not at the beginning.
Yeah, and it gives people confidence to be able to adjust things as they go. Like, you start the album, and then as they discover that they love the songs, they can say, oh, you know what? I'm going to bump up a tier. Whereas with Kickstarter, you lock in the tier before they hear any of the demos, because you guys are really great about putting demos out there and in progress reports. With Kickstarter, they're kind of locked in. They can't bump up the tier. With Patreon, you can. So this episode is unfortunately not going to come out until after your main paid post for the demos and B-sides album that you're working on right now is going to drop. But I know you said that people can still sign up for the Patreon. And can you tell people how to go back in and get whatever rewards are still possible, what hasn't been locked in yet?
Yeah, I mean, so that's the amazing thing to me with Patreon too, is like, it's a very generous platform. So like, for instance, we only do one paid post per adventure, which is when people like get charged. And if you've got a physical reward, that's when you're actually locked in. But the awesome thing is, at any time you can join and you get full access to the history of all content. So like, it's kind of a sweet deal in that, so whenever this comes out, we'll already be past our paid post. But if you come and join our Patreon, even for $1, like, all of a sudden you'll unlock 150 posts of like everything from demos to like the full copy of the last two albums, like digitally, right? And that's like fine by me. Like, yeah, come check it out and decide if you want to stick around for the next adventure. And to be real with you, people join and leave all the time. Like, on an average, I have to like look at the numbers for real, but like on an average month, we've got, a good number of people joining and a good number of people leaving. Like, people will leave based on their financial situation, based on like taking a break. It's totally fine. Like, that is the organic ebb and flow of these things, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, if somebody wants to go sign up, go do that. It's a perfect way to spend 150 posts. I could see that being a good pandemic quarantine weekend, going through everything. But did you see when the pandemic first hit, you weren't really, at that time, yet active on the new album cycle, the new album adventure? Did you see a big shift in your numbers when the pandemic first hit?
Not really. Again, to your point, like, we had just put out canonize our last full album in December before the pandemic hit, February, March. So like we weren't releasing new content or anything like that. And so I don't think there was anybody like visiting our Patreon regularly, and we weren't making much noise about it. So it wasn't a big surge for us. I don't know. But yeah, it's an interesting thought. Like people could have been like, oh, this is something to do. I better check it out.
Yeah. I was more so thinking and hoping that it was not the case, that all of a sudden, like, there's just a giant dip when everybody's like, I don't have money.
Oh, sure. Right. No. We didn't see that either.
It's great that didn't happen. Like, you weren't about to charge people, so they didn't have any incentive to leave.
Right, exactly. There's no risk. There's nothing going on your credit card. And when there is, we're going to like tell you. Like this whole month, we've been like, there's going to be a paid post. Like, bail out now if you don't want to pay.
Yeah, I think you've warned people at least 3 times already.
Yes, exactly. But you just can't it's one of the things I've learned with this is like, you just got to over communicate, because like, I don't know, people are busy and maybe they read every 4th post, or, some people obviously read every post and they're like, we get it. But then there's lots of people who are, sometimes they miss it. Sometimes they're not paying attention. So you got to let them know.
I will admit, I'm one of those people who has like 10 unread Patreon emails from I Fight Dragons. And I'm just like, someday I'm going to go through those.
And that's fine. That's the idea. There's no clock.
Yeah. And I know it'll be there. That's the thing too. Like, one other thing before we wrap this up here, because I know it's getting late. With Kickstarter, if people join one Kickstarter and then 2 years later, 4 years later, there's another Kickstarter, guess what? They don't get access to all the old stuff from the original Kickstarter. Whereas the Patreon, like you were saying, all the album adventures back to the very first post, people get access to. So I think that's another really cool way to add value, because the fans get all this extra stuff that normally they wouldn't get if you were doing a Kickstarter or any other type of crowdfunding campaign like Indiegogo or whatever's out there these days.
Yeah, they're all standalone campaigns. I love that. Like, sometimes I think about it this way. Like, my favorite band since I was in high school has been Fountains of Wayne. It's actually pretty sad. Adam Schlesinger just passed away in the early days of COVID, which absolutely awful. But I think about like how much time I spent digging on the internet to find their like B-sides and tracks, and like how much I sifted through. And like, if I had something where I could have just signed up and like gotten all this stuff, like, yeah, I would have been there in a heartbeat, and I would have loved to like sift through that. And so that's like the perspective I try and take. Like, if we are someone's favorite band, what kind of stuff would they want, and how can I make it like a generous experience for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially now, a lot of the demos and B-sides that you're putting out for SideQuest on the Patreon were stuff that went out, 10 years ago to the email list. But now it's becoming a library of your back catalog. To illustrate, I grew up as a big AFI fan. Everything was scattered. And thankfully, there was like a fan site that gathered everything and all kinds of set lists and information. This is before Setlist FM was big. And then it would be like, hey, we have this B-side that's only on like the Japanese cassette version of the album. And it's like, I feel bad for downloading this illegally, but then again, I literally can't get it unless I pay like $200 for a Japanese import,
Right. Fly to Japan.
I think it's really good that you have that out there, because one, that gives fans an incentive to join the Patreon. And two, it makes it more accessible, which is giving back to your fans far more value for, like you said, people can join for $1. That's how far the industry has come, and I hate to say the industry as if you guys are like one of, the industry bands, but that's how it's changed.
I honestly don't even know how the music industry works anymore. It's like funny, because I've just been more focused on us like having fun. Like, I have not really kept up with, like, I used to be very much an industry, especially like indie DIY music industry nerd, like back in the day. But yeah, I don't even know where it's going anymore.
To that, I would just say there are so many artists who are quote unquote in the industry who are losing money hand over foot. And they're just like pouring money, good money after bad, They're like, we can buy onto this XYZ tour and we'll all of a sudden be famous. It's like, no, that's, you got to make your own fan base, to go back to what we were talking about earlier. So arguably, I would say that because you're able to cover the production costs of your records, you might actually be doing a lot better than many bands who think they're in the industry.
Who knows? I mean, it's funny. It's like such a, because there, we bought onto tours too. You can bet your sweet bippy that's a great phrase. I hope you don't edit that out. But you can bet your sweet bippy that, the only reason we ended up on that big pop tour we did with 303 and Cobra Starship was because, we had a label that was going to contribute extra advertising money, right? We were bought onto that tour. But then the other side of that I think is also really important at the time, like I said, you have to hustle, is every stop, man. We were working the crowd. All the band members after every show had to have a box of CDs and just hawk them to people that were exiting. Did you catch your set? $5 CD or, whatever it is. Just be the chilliest. But that's how you do it, man. We moved a few CDs then, and we always obviously would be at the merch table and sign stuff. And I don't know, you just got to be hustling, because those opportunities are good, but you also have to, you're paying for them, especially if you're buying onto a tour. So I remember, especially Warped Tour, we'd see bands that was that festival was whatever you made of it, right? It was a bunch of captive people, but if you didn't go out and work that crowd to get people to come to your set, nobody came to your set.
Yeah. For Warped Tour, the example I love to use is the Main. In, I think it was 2016, they were playing one of the main stages, and they themselves personally went out into line every morning. And there were a lot of artists that did that. You guys did that, I'm sure, when you were on Warped Tour. Yeah, I saw you out there even one of the years.
Yeah, we were still trying to be innovative. I had these big heater shields commissioned, that said I-Fight Dragons on them, painted, and then we wore these white suits with helmets and walked around just to look ridiculous. And people be like, "Who the hell is I-Fight Dragons?" And they came and checked out our set.
I'm now remembering, I think it was New Mexico, and it was 1,000,000,000 degrees, and I saw one of you walking around in this suit.
We still walked around.
Oh, that must have been a nightmare.
It was not great. Yeah, I will admit there were some of those days when we didn't get out there and do it because it was just physically impossible. But we did, and then we actually had. So there were times when we let fans. We had a giant flagpole with an I-Fight Dragons flag, and you could be the flag bearer for the day. So there'd be a fan that just walked around with it. You just got to get creative.
Yeah, I swear I'll wrap it up here shortly. My main point with the Main and I-Fight Dragons is, you guys were on the Ernie Ball stage, at least the year I was out there. And for bands on the smaller stages, it was maybe not the norm, but much more common to see those artists out in line. I think the Main is the only main stage band I ever saw out in the lines. Some bands would send out, a merch person.
Yeah, exactly. They'd send out someone from their crew.
It's you go. And the Main would be no, we're actually here. And it was half the band, the other half would be doing whatever, interviews or whatever they have. But 2 or 3 of the guys would be out in lines with their merch guy, selling CDs, signing stuff. That's the kind of dedication that you're talking about, essentially. 2 more questions. I'll make them short. First one is, you mentioned you have fans walking around with a flagpole. You guys had a very active street team back in the day. How much of a role do you think that played in your overall growth as a band?
It's so hard to tell. I wish I knew, right? Because I tell you, that was a big investment. Especially we had the street team we called the Advanced Guard. When it first started, I was on a site that was called Groups, grou.ps. We moved it over to a Ning, which was your own. It was a build your own social network. There was a lot of these type of sites back in the day. But yeah, it was based around a point system where people, we would mail you posters or download cards, and people could go and put up the posters and hand out the download cards at shows and at different events. And then people, got levels. So it was a ton of money to produce that stuff, to ship it out. And then even to I was, manufacturing the cards myself, but, we'd make the cards that for people as they got ranks, you could be a guardian and a knight and all this stuff. And we would, the whole band would sign the cards and make them for people. But, I wish I could tell you conclusively, that was money super well spent. But I don't know. It was fun. It was a cool adventure, I think. And I just know that for a lot of people that participated, they made great friendships too. It's funny. Now we recently, in the past 6 months ago or so, started up a Discord because we had kind of shut down the Advanced Guard as a going concern years back, the street team. But now there's a private channel for folks in the Discord that were in that. And so it's cool to see people reconnect from years ago. And they had had their own Facebook group for a while. And I don't know. It's definitely an investment. I feel like I was always ambivalent, but the idea of street team was always very popular. I'd say especially 10 years ago. Let me put it this way. The folks in there work their butts off. So I'm going to say that yes, they had a great impact and they contributed greatly. Because if nothing else, like they're some of the biggest fans out there, and like they came to shows and are just awesome people. I know tons of them by name, and I feel like a lot of them have contributed to the band and the band's culture in big ways.
Yeah, that I hate to do this. That brings me to one other thing I want to point out is all those people you added to the street team that might have actually strengthened their appreciation of the band, because those connections, that's what people like about music, is they connect to it. So if all of a sudden their three best friends all listen to it as well, that's going to just make a stronger connection with the music. And I'm not even going to turn that into a question. I'm just going to move over to my last real question.
No, hold on, because it's good.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to at least reinforce you there, because you're totally right. And like, there's other stuff. Like, I remember the very first guy to join the like street team site was a guy from the UK. I just happened to have launched it at an hour when like he was one of the only ones awake, and he was like, I remember him popping in there and chatting with me, and I was like, "Hey, what's up?" And he's like, "What's going on here? Is this a new thing?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's a new thing." And I obviously never met him in person. We never played in the UK. And then when we went on a tour a couple of years ago, he flew all the way to Cleveland for our show, and I met him in person, and it was like crazy because of course I remembered his name and like we had met. I mean, I did a job reference for one of the guys who was like really a big. He helped us administrate some of the stuff, but he was pretty young at the time, and so like he was applying for a job, and he put me down as a reference. So that it deepens connections, but it's also just like, I don't know, it's great. It's a good like part of life, and it's a good way to remember that like bands are human and fans are human. Like we're all just humans at the end.
Yeah. That's amazing that the fans are that dedicated that they fly from the UK. Like, I think that's all that any band can really ask for.
Exactly. I'm totally with you there.
Yeah. Well, my last real question for you is, if you had one piece of advice to give to an artist who's starting out these days, if not advice, some words of encouragement, what would you say to the DIY artist who is getting their feet wet in music and they think the world's their oyster?
Yeah. I'll say the biggest mindset shift for me of all was I spent a couple of years when I first was trying to do music as a career thinking about, all right, what's the music I want to make? And then once I made that music, how do I push that out in the world? And I didn't get anywhere. Like I've had early bands and solo stuff, and like none of it made a dent. None of it did anything. And I think the biggest thing that changed for me was when I stopped thinking about, all right, me, and then how do I push that out? And started thinking more about what is the community out there that I want to be a part of. So whether that's, the bands that I'm into, the music scenes that inspire me, like thinking about where you fit in the broader kind of musical landscape and scene and community, I think is a different way to approach things, and I've found it far more rewarding. And I think it applies to everything from making music to marketing music. Like, and it's funny because I think a lot of people still get stuck on that. Like going back to what we said about the idea that like it actually doesn't matter what Justin Bieber does or what like, a pop superstar does from a marketing perspective from any of it, because it's just not going to apply. But like, what about the bands you love that have 100,000 monthly Spotify listeners? And if you don't love any bands that have 100,000 Spotify monthly listeners, then you've got a big gap in your knowledge. Like you have no visibility to who would actually like your music, because like in my mind, those are the types of bands that are like, that have come out within the past 5 years and are like up and coming and have a small but dedicated fan base. Like not only are those the type of bands that you'd want to find that whose fans might like yours, but like also those are the bands you want to tour with, right? Like that's the scene you want to be a part of. Like if it boiled down to something, it's like thinking about finding your place in a musical community is far more effective than thinking about how to push your kind of internally focused stuff out into the world in a canon. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I think that is the perfect piece of advice to close this out on. I don't even know how to wrap that up. That's just so perfect. That goes back to, like you said, finding what artists are similar to you, like what fan base you could kind of go after, but also just, it's the Go-Giver mindset. I don't know. Have you read The Go-Giver?
No, Go-Giver.
It's a great book that basically says you have to give more than you take, And once you do that, then you will receive in return. It's a great book. It's like 110, 120 pages, super quick read, and it's a parable.
I'll check it out.
I recommend it on the podcast all the time. It's that good. It's like probably my favorite, I don't want to say self-help book because that's a loaded term, but like it's one of my favorite mindset books.
I love that, like, self-improvement books. Yeah.
I think that sums it up really. As you were being a go-giver, you said, I want to create something that I would want to be a part of. That's so great. And bands, you should pay attention to that. That's what builds a community, and that's what builds a band. So, Brian, thank you so much for hanging out tonight and talking about I Fight Dragons and everything you've done with the band, going really deep into... There's so much other stuff we could have talked about, but going really deep into the business.
We've been around for a while now, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So obviously you have your site, which is ifightdragons.com.
And plus, I'm pretty sure the first time you interviewed me was in the back of our van in Boston, I want to say. This is probably like 2012.
It was the Too Fast for Love tour.
Really? Okay.
Because I remember Travis McCoy opened the door of the green room and hit me with a door and knocked me over. And that was the end of the interview.
That's amazing.
Or no, was it Travis? No, it was your tour manager saying Travis McCoy is coming. That's what it was.
Okay.
That's like a step down on the claim to fame. But
too funny.
So anyway, ifightdragons.com is your website. And then you have the Patreon, which is patreon.com/ifightdragons. Those links will both be in the show notes at bandhive.rocks/77. Are there any other links you would like to shout out and put out there?
No, I'd say just ifightdragons.com has all the other links too. So like it's got the web store if you want to buy merch. It's got the Discord like on there. So yeah, anything. And we keep that up to date. Email list, sign up. You can always get, it's been funny. People somehow like discover this over the years, but like we've always given away our latest release for free if you sign up for the email list. And people are like, what? You give it away for free? I was like, yeah, man, this is like over a decade old at this point. Like since we started as a band, we were giving away our first EP for free if you signed up for the email list. And we continue to do that.
Well, cool. Brian, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I think this is going to be a really, really helpful listen for our listeners to glean lots of knowledge from.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
That does it for another episode of the Band Hive podcast, and talk about getting carpet bombed with knowledge bombs. Brian has so much knowledge of being in a DIY band who, like he said in the interview, they didn't make it, but they are able to consistently make music and have it paid for by their fans. They can cover their costs. And I think that's amazing because ultimately, if you're in a band, you can either strive to make it your full-time career, which is great. I'm all for that. But if you can make the music you want to make and express yourself creatively and not have to pay out of pocket for that, that is amazing in and of itself. So I think that for a lot of artists, this is something that should be a really valuable lesson. I encourage you to go check out I Fight Dragons music at ifightdragons.com, and you can also join our Facebook group by searching for Band Hive and come into the group and discuss the episode with us. Tell us what you think. Do you think this is a good model where artists have their production paid for by their fans and they're not necessarily trying to make it their full-time career, but they are able to have that creativity covered? I think that's so important because essentially what that's saying is, hey, people value your art, they will pay for your art, and you can go make the art that you want. And I think that's amazing. Like not having the stress of, man, where am I going to get all this money for my next album? That's amazing. So again, thank you so much to Brian for coming on this show. I really hope you all enjoy this episode, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you all think of Brian's interview and the business model that I Fight Dragons has been following. So yeah, we'll be back with another new episode next Tuesday at 6 a.m. It's going to be tough to top this one, but we're going to do our best. Until then, I hope you all have an awesome week, stay safe, and of course, as always, keep rocking.